The auction block reeked of despair and disinfectant. Kale stood in chains, his human frame dwarfed by the towering Vorthani slave masters who paraded him before the galaxy's elite. To the assembled crowd of 100 different species, humans were curiosities, primitives from a backwater world that had been conquered before they'd even left their own solar system. Lot 7749, the auctioneer's translator chip announced across multiple frequencies. Male human, prime specimen, excellent stamina, suitable for mining operations or gladiatorial entertainment. The Krill warlord Thaxmore paid 800 credits for him. It was less than the cost of a decent plasma rifle. Kale had been 15 when the Vorthani harvest ships descended on Earth. He'd watched his family evaporated by energy weapons when his father dared to fight back. For 5 years he'd survived processing centers, transport ships, and the crushing realization that humanity meant nothing to the galaxy at large. They were livestock, disposable labor. Sometimes, if they were lucky, they were entertainment. Thaxmore's arena on Krell 7 was where luck went to die. The arena master, a scarred Vexthari named Gron, threw Kale into a cell with 3 other humans. They were hollow-eyed and broken, covered in poorly healed wounds. One of them, an older man named Marcus, still had fight in his eyes. "You're new," Marcus said, sizing him up. "Word of advice, don't try to win. Winners fight again and again until they don't." But Kale had learned something the galaxy hadn't anticipated about humans. They were adaptable. Evolution had forged them in a crucible of ice ages, predators, diseases, and their own violence. And when you stripped everything else away, when you pushed a human past every breaking point, something primal awakened. His first match was against a Corvan, 8 feet of armored hide and crushing strength. The crowd roared for blood. The Corvan charged. Kale dodged, studying its movement, its breathing, the slight favor it gave to its left side. He lost that fight, but he survived. He survived the next one, too. And the next? Kale began to notice patterns. The Vexthari were fast but tired quickly in extended combat. The Dravok had exoskeletons with weak points at the joints. The Xyloth could regenerate but needed oxygen-rich environments to do it effectively. Every species had advantages the galaxy had refined over millions of years of evolution. But they also had predictable weaknesses. Humans had been evolution's underdogs. They'd clawed their way to sentience without venom, claws, armor, or overwhelming strength. What they had was endurance, pattern recognition, and the ability to learn from failure. Kale didn't just survive. He studied. He adapted. He began to win. At night, Marcus taught him what he'd learned in 3 years of arena combat. "The galaxy thinks we're weak because we don't have their natural weapons," Marcus said, his voice barely a whisper. "They don't understand that we became the apex predator on Earth because we didn't have those things. We had to be smarter, more persistent. We persistence hunted megafauna to extinction. We turned tools into extensions of ourselves. That's the human advantage. We're generalists in a galaxy of specialists." Kyle's reputation grew. 20 victories, 50, 100. Thaxmore began betting fortunes on him. The crowd started chanting a name they'd given him, Terra's Wraith. But Kale wasn't fighting for glory. Every opponent he studied, every technique he mastered, every weakness he cataloged, it was all data, intelligence, a map of the galaxy's warriors that existed nowhere except in his mind. The turning point came during the Grand Melee, an annual event where Thaxmore's champion would face warriors from across the sector. 64 fighters entered the multi-tiered arena. Only one would leave. Kale faced them all. He used the Dravok's own momentum to shatter their exoskeletons against arena walls. He lured the Vexithari into prolonged chases until their 3-chambered hearts gave out. He identified the Xyloth's dependence on atmospheric processors and destroyed them, turning their regeneration into a liability. In the final match, he stood opposite Krax the Undying, a Vorthani war champion who hadn't lost in 2 decades. Krax had 4 arms, energy-resistant skin, and combat implants that made him a walking weapon. The galaxy watched. Billions tuned in across the sector. Krax attacked with overwhelming force, exactly as Kale knew he would. The Vorthani doctrine was shock and awe, end fights before they began. But humans had learned to fight wars of attrition. Kale gave ground, absorbed punishment, waited for patterns. 12 minutes into the fight, he noticed it. A micro-delay in Krax's lower left arm, a timing issue with his neural implants. Kale struck, not with strength but with precision. He turned Krax's own enhanced reflexes into a cascade failure. forcing movements that overloaded his combat system. When Krax's implants seized, when that fraction of a second of paralysis hit, Kale didn't hesitate. The arena fell silent as Krax collapsed. Terra's wraith had done the impossible. Thaxmore approached him in his cell that night, surrounded by guards. But the warlord's expression wasn't angry. It was calculating. "I could sell you for 1,000,000 credits to any warlord in the galaxy," Thaxmore said. "But I'm offering you something else. Freedom, a ship, resources. In exchange, you train my soldiers. You teach them to fight like you do." Kale looked at the warlord through the bars. 5 years ago, he would have taken it, but he'd learned something else in the arena. He'd learned that the galaxy's power structures were brittle. They'd never faced a real challenge because they'd conquered everyone before true resistance could form. "No," Kale said. "I have a better idea." 3 months later, the broadcast started. Across the slave worlds, in the processing centers, in the mines and arenas and labor camps, humans began to hear the story of Terra's wraith. They learned his techniques, his strategies, his philosophy. The galaxy had made a crucial mistake. They'd built an entire economy on enslaved humanity, never realizing they were creating an army of motivated learners scattered across 1,000 worlds. Humans who'd survived impossible conditions, who'd adapted to alien environments, who'd learned to fight by watching the galaxy's warriors and finding their weaknesses. When the uprising began, it wasn't with superior technology or numbers. It was with technique, with strategy, with the accumulated knowledge of 10,000 human slaves who'd learned to turn their captors' strengths into vulnerabilities. Kale stood aboard a liberated transport ship, watching Earth grow larger in the viewport. He'd been a slave, a gladiator, a survivor. Now he was leading humanity home. The galaxy was about to learn what it meant to face a species that had clawed its way to sentience, not through strength or specialization, but through adaptation, persistence, and the refusal to accept defeat. They were about to learn why humanity had ruled Earth, and why they would rule the stars.